On the evening of December 11th, 1986, Tommy and a friend took off from Palmdale Airport, just outside Los Angeles. A few hours later, Tommy's plane disappeared from radar screens. Authorities believe that Tommy became disoriented in heavy weather over the New Mexico mountains. Tommy Levitz was dead at the age of 19, and Chris was beside himself with grief.
It was devastating. It was absolutely devastating, and there was nothing that I could do to ease Chris's pain.
When Tommy died, Chris was just shattered. He completely lost his moorings. He was like a ship at sea with no compass.
Though she says she was upset by Tommy's death, Roma tried to convince Chris that Crush could go on with a different singer.
Certainly what happened to Tommy was a horrible thing. But I had a business investment to protect, so I was looking for other options.
There was no music without Tommy. Tommy was the music. So there was not going to be a replacement for Tommy. Crush was dead. Chris Gaines was dead.
Next, Chris faces an uncertain future.
He confided in me that he didn't know if he wanted to go on.
In later life in the fast lane comes to a crashing halt.
It just seemed like it just kept hurting and hurting.
When Behind the Life of Chris Gaines continues. When Chris Gaines and Tommy Levitz formed Crush in Los Angeles in 1985, the two teenagers shared an ambitious dream. They wanted to become the new Lennon and McCartney.
You know, all young rockers think like that and say that, but there's something about how eager they were about it that made you almost believe it.
But the dream was not to be. When Tommy died in a plane crash in December of 1986, Chris was paralyzed with grief.
This is the way the story has to be told. That's the way I remember it. I remember it that way.
Tommy was the kind of person I always wanted to be. He was a success in anything he tried.
I remember it.
A week after his death, Tommy Levitt's mother brought Chris a ring that Tommy had been wearing when he died.
She said she wanted me to have it. This ring was the greatest gift to me at that point.
Though he had achieved fame, Chris wasn't sure he wanted to go on without Tommy. But in the fall of '87, a serious illness had an unexpected effect.
My dad was diagnosed with cancer. And in some selfish way, I realized I only had a short amount of time to be a success before my father passed on.
Maybe I could stand alone. Maybe I'm strong as stone.
While Gene Gaines began undergoing cancer treatments, Chris started work on his first solo album. He went into the studio under the guidance of legendary producer Don Was.
When it came to this music, he knew exactly what he wanted to do, and there was really no arguing with him.
But Chris soon felt that his vision was being clouded by record company interference. The label's meddling inspired Chris to give the album its title.
The term straitjacket started being thrown around the studio. It's like trying to record in a straitjacket.
He thought that the record label was telling him, you know, who to sing with, who to produce with, who to write with, what to write.
Straitjacket was released in the fall of 1989. Powered by singles like White Flag and Digging for Gold, the record company battles were forgotten as the album surged up the charts.
People were just stunned by its success. Basically, in Crush, Tommy had kind of been the leading figure. So no one really knew how talented Chris was.
A straitjacket was like catching lightning in a bottle. It just happened.
All of a sudden, Chris Gaines was everywhere. I'd go in a record store. I'd go you know, in New York or L.A. And there was my face everywhere.
Tasha Simon dated Chris in the early 90s. She says Chris was also making a name for himself in hotel rooms all over the world.
Chris did have the reputation of being a womanizer, and I think everybody earns a little bit of their reputation.
He had babes at home, on the road, on the bus, on tour, off tour, in the studio, out of the studio, in a session, out of session, in clubs, in bars. I mean, I couldn't keep track of it.
By the fall of 1990, Chris's solo debut had sold an incredible 12 million copies. Straight Jacket was the biggest album of the year, and Chris stood alone at the pinnacle of the music business. To celebrate, he bought a house in Malibu and treated himself to a fancy sports car. Yet despite his achievements, Chris still hadn't proved himself in the eyes of his father.
One of the greatest sadnesses for Chris, I think, was the fact that his father never acknowledged his success.
Chris was having a lot of success at that particular time. He had a big album. But he really wasn't enjoying it that much. You would have thought he would have been. But you know, his dad was sick at that point. His dad was fighting cancer.
My father had got to the point with his battle that we could not fight anymore. He could not defend himself. So I never found it in me to say, who was right, Dad?
On November 15th, 1990, Chris's father, Gene, lost his 3-year battle with cancer.
A little part of Chris died that day. He was different after that.
Chris had little time to grieve his father's passing. Just weeks later, he was blindsided by another crisis. When he took a close look at the royalty statements from the sales of Straight Jacket, Chris's grief turned to shock.
To sell 12.5 million records in 1 year and walk away with somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million. It's impossible.
But Chris was in for an even bigger surprise.
He called me up late one night and he said, Mum, I've just realized something. I've just been going through this contract and I've just realized that I don't own this wonderful house. It's not mine. It's Roma's, and she is charging me rent. She owns it.
To find out that the house that you're living in, that you paid for, is not your own house. It was a real eye-opener.
And that was just the beginning. When Chris finally read his contract, he realized he'd signed away almost everything. In fact, he didn't have a deal with the record company at all. Roma did.
I can't help it if he didn't read the documents that he was sent. That's not my fault.
Complicating matters was the fact that Chris and Roma had become intimate personally as well as professionally.
Roma and I did have a relationship that extended, you know, past professionalism. If it was a professional relationship, I'd be a lot richer than I am now.
Chris filed suit against Roma to be released from his production deal with her management firm. But a few weeks later, he decided to take a few lumps in exchange for his freedom. He dropped the lawsuit and reached a financial settlement with Roma.
The thing with Roma had gotten so bad that I just wanted it over. And so we settled.
I made him who he is today, and I deserved every penny that I made.
I think he learned a hard lesson. You have to watch your own back no matter who you're dealing with.
At the age of 24, Chris was reeling from the loss of his father and his break with his manager. Music fell by the wayside as he struggled to cope with his problems.
His problems with Roma, the manager, took a tremendous toll on him. He felt really betrayed. He was questioning all of human nature.
Next, a disfiguring car crash nearly ends Chris's career.
His jaw was literally almost ripped off.
And later, pleasure turns to pain when sex addiction takes over Chris's life.
You know how some people go into an ice cream shop and they like vanilla ice cream, and then another guy goes in and he has to try all 32 flavors. Well, Chris is a 32 flavor kind of guy.
When Behind the Life of Chris Gaines continues.
But Albert's turned up a clue.
The skin's